Podcasting for brands. IAmTheHow.com.
102.5 FM.
So here we are. I was going to say it's Friday. It's not Friday. It's Wednesday. It's 5 o'clock on Wednesday. This is Wavelength. I'm Dave Clark. I am the How. You're listening to Sound Art Radio on 102.5 FM. So thanks to Patrick there. I think Patrick was doing the framework radio program. Some beautiful soundscapes there. And if you get the chance, do listen to Patrick's program. It's broadcast on Sound Art Radio, but it also has a Mixcloud channel. All the episodes are on Mixcloud. That's not SoundCloud, that's Mixcloud. And he's got his website as well, Framework Radio. Well worth a listen. So what are we doing this week? Well, it's all very interesting, actually, because I've got a great guest. Well, some say he's great. Others say he's not so great. He's actually called Dave Clark. And, well, there's a coincidence, because I'm Dave Clark. So, Dave, how are you doing? Well, I'm very well, actually, thanks. It's great to be on the programme. No, that's an absolute pleasure, Dave, and you're more than welcome. So, as they say, or as I say in this programme, what is it? Tell us, what is it that you do in a nutshell? Well, that's a good question, that. And it's something that I get asked quite a lot. So, in a nutshell, I make podcasts for brands. And by brands, what I mean is any organisation, really, any business, any charity that has a story to tell. I help people to plan that story, to produce that story, and to publish that story for, well, generally speaking, for marketing purposes. Well, that's great. So, Dave, tell me a little bit about the journey. So, how did you end up doing what you do today? Well, Dave, good question. So for me, it's always been, I guess, really, it's always been about content. So, content is this name, this word that's given to material, whether that's written copy, whether that's audio, whether it's video copy, imagery, photographs, etc. It's all basically lumped together in this word, content. So my journey has always been, around. Well, I've always worked with content. So I started many years ago. Let me think, with the Financial Times, where we basically took financial content, information about businesses and boards and mergers and acquisitions and growth plans and so on. We took all of that content from newspapers and other specialist publications, as well as some, at that time, small, digital sources. We aggregated that content, which means that we sort of put it all together. We repackaged it, and then we sold that to individuals and businesses who needed to know about what was going on in their particular sector. And very much the same kind of story working with the Weather Channel, where we were basically collecting or aggregating meteorological data, and we were packaging that into weather products, all kinds of products. So obviously weather for your TV, weather for your radio, weather for your website, but also aviation weather, golfing weather, all kinds of leisure weather, insurance, all that kind of stuff. And then more latterly, I did a spell, quite a decent spell down at Estover, working for 2-4, a broadcast production company, making broadcast TV and non-broadcast video as well. So that's it, really. So it's always been about aggregating, producing, and publishing content. Interesting stuff, Dave. So tell us a little bit about the actual offer itself. So what is it in detail that you do? Okay, so basically, with all content, with any kind of creative project, the first step has got to be the brief. The brief. Some people call it the creative brief. Now, this is really important. This is the crucial foundation on which everything else is constructed. And if you get your foundations right, then the likelihood of you having a strong offer is one that stands up. It's more likely than not. So in my experience, a lot of people don't put enough time into their planning, into their brief. They have an idea, they think they know what they want, they feel that they need to be doing whatever it is they've decided to do, so they plow straight into it, producing content. And never has this been more true than on some of the sort of business and social channels, where you get quite significant brands, global brands. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on these channels, and the content that they're producing isn't really, in some people's opinions, it's not really that good. It's just a question of being there. We're on this platform. That makes us feel like we're doing what we need to be doing. But in actual fact, it's the plan that's the really important part. I'll come back to that in a second. The second part is the production. So we've got the planning, then we move on to the production. And third part is the publication, which is getting it out there. Fourth part is the promotion. And again, that's a really critical part. It's almost as important to think about that at the planning stage as any other aspect of the project. So just to sort of wind back a little bit, let's talk about the brief. So when we talk about a creative brief, the first thing we do is the scene setter. So we basically talk about the background of the project. So let's take a business. Let's take a retail business. Retail business A. So we basically talk to that business. We say, what is it that you've arrived at? What do you actually do? What are your sort of general kind of thoughts? So the background is basically, where are we as a business? What have we tried? Where have we had successes? Where have we seen our growth? Where have we not been so successful? What are our competitors doing? And what is it that we'd like to do? What is it that we're aiming to achieve? That's just normally a paragraph, just a scene setter. Then we get to the big idea. Now, the big idea is really borrowed from the sort of the advertising agencies. It's that nutshell proposition. What is it that we're trying to do? What's the idea? So typically that would be, we want to produce a series of podcasts that talk about interesting subjects that resonate with our audience in order to raise our brand and our business offer. And that's it. That's the big idea. So you've got the background, you've got the big idea. Next two sections are really important. This is where we talk about the audience. Now, everybody says you've got to know your audience. And the reason why everybody says you've got to know your audience is because if you can talk to people about the things that they are interested in, then they're going to listen to what you have to say. If you start talking to people that have no interest in what you're talking about, so let's say, for example, you're talking to a cricket audience about fly fishing, the chances are they're not going to be so interested. Anyway, we'll get back to that, because if you had a really good cricket person talking about fly fishing, that might be quite interesting, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So knowing the audience is basically, who are they? Where are they? This is quite tricky stuff, but you'll probably, as a brand, you'll probably know where your audience are. You'll probably know that you've got a big following on some of the social and business channels. You'll know that their kind of profile, the kind of gender, the age group, that kind of thing, their sort of buying habits, the kind of lifestyle that they have. That's the kind of things that we need to sort of fix in that particular part of the brief. The next heading is the values, the sort of, people call it the brand values. So as a business, what is it that you stand for? Now, this isn't some kind of sort of wishy-washy words that you get on some of these big sort of American corporate sort of websites. Our values are, be nice to each other and look after your staff and all that kind of stuff. This is really about brands telling people why they do what they do. So they're in a particular business in order to make people's lives easier by solving problems and making things more easy to approach, easier to do, easier to transact with, that kind of thing. So once you know your audience and you know what you stand for as a business, that's the key to coming up with the next really big deal, which is the narrative. And when we're talking about the narrative, that really is, what story are we going to tell that resonates with that audience? So we don't want to talk about products and services, because products and services are boring generally, and also people know what the products and services are within a business. What we want to talk about is the bigger overarching narrative. So how does your work as a business, or how does your work as a charity affect people in your community, in the society, in the world as a whole? So what are the bigger narratives that sort of that play out? So let's give you an example of that kind of thing. If we're talking to, for example, an insurance company. I was talking to an insurance company the other day, and they were basically saying, okay, well, our background is we're an insurance company. We're based in Kingsbridge. We're quite small. We want to grow. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We've got quite good marketing campaigns. We've succeeded here. We've failed here, that kind of thing. We've got an idea, which is we want to reach out to more people using podcasts and long-form content. We know our audience. They're generally people who have got houses and cars. They have property and assets that they need to insure. Our values are all about risk, managing risk. That's what we do as an insurance company. We basically help to mitigate risk. We help people to cover themselves. So what's the narrative? They ask, what is it? Are we going to talk about insurance products? Are we going to talk about insurance services? The answer is no, you're not, because that's boring. I mean, we all know that when we're on the phone talking to our insurer, actually, it's a really boring time. So the narrative in this case would be something a little bit more creative. So we'd look at the word risk. We'd look at the idea of risk, and perhaps what we'd say is, look, how about we talk to people who take risks? And how about we understand from them how they mitigate those risks? But we're doing this in a format which is going to be quite engaging and quite interesting. So, for example, we could take a rock climber, and we could say, look, you're scaling a rock face on, you're bouldering on Dartmoor, or you're scaling a rock face in the Lake District. It doesn't matter where you are. But how is it that you can put all your faith in the pegs that you drive into the rock and the rope? What is it that you do to mitigate the risk? So we'd hear from those people about how they understand risk and how they're prepared to take risks, and how, in actual fact, they're not really taking risks, because what they're doing is they're mitigating against those risks. So that is a bigger narrative. We could have another piece of content looking at a crew of fishermen, who go out from Brixham, let's say, and they go out into the high seas during winter storms, and that's a pretty bad place to be for a lot of people. That's a really risky business. But again, they're mitigating that risk because they're looking at the kind of equipment they've got. They're looking at the kind of safety harnesses that they're wearing. They're looking at the weather forecast. They're looking at their contact with the Coast Guard. They're making sure that all of the equipment they've got is up to date and that functions well, and so on. So, but it's an interesting program. So what we're talking about here is an insurance company that wants to produce content that is about risk, but we're not talking about the products and the services of that company. We're talking about the bigger narrative of risk, and we illustrate that narrative by using interesting stories from people who manage risk. And therefore, that's the proposition. So you've got a whole program series made about risk, which is exactly what that insurance company does, based in Kingsbridge. That is exactly what they do. They manage risk. So that's the nitty-gritty of it. Right, well, that all makes sense. So let me just give a quick recap. So you've got the background, the big idea, you understand your audience, you understand the brand, and from that you're able to, design, come up with some sort of interesting narratives. And is that it? Well, it's almost it, because then you get down to the nitty-gritty, really, which is, that's the hard part, put it that way. But then you've got to think about the format, and the format is really, think about a broadcast program, any TV program, any radio program. It has a duration, it has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end, it has perhaps a little bit of drama, maybe a little bit of jeopardy, might have a little bit of humour. You can use all of these tools, but basically there's a format, and people like a recognisable format. So if you make a series of podcasts, each episode, it doesn't need to be exactly the same, but it's really quite good if the episode 1 has a format which is shared by episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, etc. Because then your audience doesn't have to work hard at understanding where the program's going. They kind of know that. They feel familiar with the format, and it takes that little bit of energy out, or that little bit of effort out of their listening experience, and they feel more relaxed and more able to listen to it. So format is key. You can design the format. The tone of voice could be a straight, business, serious tone, political kind of inquiry tone. It could be something a little bit more light, a little bit more friendly, a little bit more, as I'm doing now, a little bit, authentic, live, made up on the spot, and unscripted. Stress that. And it could be, there's all different types of tone. Serious, humorous, dramatic, all that kind of stuff. Then we have to think about the talent. Now, the talent is really key. It goes back to that cricketer and the example I gave earlier. Basically, put it this way. If Jeremy Clarkson were to appear and host a cookery show on TV, a lot of people would watch that. Now, they wouldn't necessarily be watching it because they like cookery. They'd be following the talent. So they watch the program because of the talent. So if you can get people on your podcast who are known within the area in which you operate, whether they're people you work with, even your competitors, big players, governing bodies, that kind of thing, people who sort of know a lot and who are recognised, these are the talent. These are well-connected people that people kind of respect, or not, as the case may be, but they're people who, they're known, they give a bit of gravitas to that whole podcast. So your talent's really important. You've got to decide who that is. Having you in the program's okay, but maybe not a lot of people know you, so, maybe it's better to get somebody else to help you with that. And then that's it, really. A couple of other things to think about, which is the big question. Why are you actually doing this? So what are the objectives, and how are you going to measure those objectives? Now, I'm not a great believer in key performance indicators. I don't think we should beat ourselves up over metrics, and listening metrics and viewing metrics are all kind of weird anyway. These videos that you see that have been viewed millions of times, you kind of wonder, with the prevalence of bots and the fact that you can, a view could be like 0.01 of a second. But the point is, you need some kind of measurability. So there's two objectives, really. There's the content objective and there's the strategic objective. The content objective is what do you want the content to achieve? You want people, obviously, to listen. I imagine that you want them to be informed, you want them to learn something, you want them to know something at the end of that episode that they weren't aware of before. The strategic objective is, often called the call to action. What is it that you want the audience to do once they've actually listened to that podcast? Do you want them to change their behavior? Do you want them just to be aware of something that they were not aware of before? Do you want them to be educated into something? Or do you want them to pick up the phone, click on a link, buy something? What is the kind of transaction? So that's it. that's the plan. Now, I've talked about that quite a lot, but it is the foundation and it is the most important part of producing any content, and that holds true for podcasts as well. Great. So that's the plan. So tell me a little bit more, Dave, about the production, the publication, and the promotion. Good question. Or thanks very much, Dave, I should say. So once you've got the plan in place, and that's agreed. Don't forget, plans can change. That's fine. But broadly speaking, you've covered off all the bases. You get into the production, and this is really the where and the when and the how are you actually going to do this. You've got to turn up somewhere with a microphone. You've got to meet somebody somewhere, quiet, preferably, in the right place. They've got to be briefed as they've got to know what they're talking about and that kind of stuff. So to produce it, you've basically got to do all the production logistics, the where, when, and the how, and then of course you've got to edit that content into something that's makes sense. So that's the production. Publication, well, that's pretty easy. The technology is all there. It's a little bit like Facebook. You write something, you add an image, you press publish, and that's it. Or it's a bit like LinkedIn or Instagram. Any of these channels. It's the same with podcasting. A little bit more tricky in a way, but there are plenty of podcast hosting platforms out there. I use one called Libsyn, which is Liberated Syndication. You basically upload your audio file, you put in your associated copy, imagery, and then you also publish that. That generates an RSS feed. The RSS feed then gets picked up by Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Podcasts, Spotify, and about hundreds of other podcast platforms. So the publication part that's easy. It's the production part which is a bit more tricky, but actually the production part is made much more easy, as we've said, if you have a good plan in place. So your plan tells you what you're going to produce, and once you've produced it, you can publish that quite easily. So that's it then, Dave. You've got yourself a successful series of podcasts. Well, actually, Dave, that's where you're wrong, because the last one is also quite important, and that's the promotion. It's quite easy to publish stuff. You can publish a book on Amazon. You can publish your blog. You can publish video. You can publish a podcast. But how does that actually get out? How do you build an audience? Well, that's that is the $64 million question. How do you build your audience? Well, you've got to have some kind of media strategy. That's actually part of the brief as well. The media strategy is basically looking at the social and business channels that you have, the face-to-face networking opportunities that you have, the third-party digital channels that you may find are interested in carrying your content. And you have to have a content and channel plan. You have to think campaign. It's not a question of just pressing a button and then suddenly your podcast goes out there and everybody is listening to it like they've never heard anything better before in their life and they can't wait for the next one. It's just not like that. It's a very, very crowded world. And if you look at the big players like the BBC and the BBC Sounds app and all of that kind of stuff, they promote and plug and promote and plug their own programs, their own podcasts all the time. So brands have got to think like broadcasters. They've got to think about the brief. They've got to think about the production and their audience. They've got to think about the channels, but they've also got to think about their media strategy, which is how they are going to get that content out there. Now, one of the ways of doing that is, of course, to leverage off the talent. So, the talent, influencers, call them what you like. But basically, if you've got somebody in your program who is well connected, they can reach an audience that you actually haven't had access to, and that's all good stuff. So audience building, promotion is really key. So that's it. That is the process, and there we go. Well, thanks, Dave. That's a really interesting. Well, I thought that was really interesting insight into the process of producing a podcast. Maybe you'll come back. Maybe we'll come back to the studio and talk about that some more. Do you really think so? Actually, I've probably bored the socks off most people who are listening, so I won't take you up on that offer. But maybe with a bit of thought, I could. Okay, so tell me, Dave, why do you do what you do? Money. No. Everybody says that. Okay, so, well, actually, that's an interesting thing because there's a survey out today which basically says something like, I think it was either 15 or 20%, only 15 or 20% of podcasts are actually making any money. That's a stat that when you think about the number of, there are 6.5 million downloads. Well, there's over 6.5 million downloads each week in the UK alone of podcasts. And if you're actually thinking that something like 15, 20% of that they're the only ones that are actually making any money, that's an awful lot of content that is being generated, which isn't financially viable as a business. Now, that's fine. So a lot of people do it for fun. A lot of people do it for pleasure. A lot of people do it for education, altruistic reasons, and so on. But, there are a lot of business and a lot of brands out there who are doing this, and so it's quite a complicated picture. I actually do make money doing this because I charge a production budget. So we kind of work out how many days it's going to take and we charge accordingly. Money aside, I just think that every brand, every business has got an interesting story. And my observation is that there's far too many of those businesses that really get stuck, and they say they want to be more creative. They know they need to be more creative. They understand that it's a really noisy place out there and they need to cut through that noise. You hear all these things all the time. But when it comes to their content production, boy, they are quite often boring. And the reason they're boring is there's a couple of reasons. The first is they don't have the process in place. They don't understand the discipline around the brief. So they really don't get that. The second thing is they don't have time. So it all starts off really well, but actually they are really concerned about their business in terms of what they're doing, their customers, their staff, their ambitions for the future, their strategy, etc., etc., etc. So unless they have a sort of creative marketing department, they're not really going to be able to do this. So I think there's a lot of businesses out there that could really tell some fantastic stories, but they just need to know how to do that. And I stress the word how because that is how production. That is AKA I am the how. So that's how that all sort of fits in. So the only other thing to say on that is that this thing about creativity, it's not some kind of God-given gift. I mean, if you're sort of Beethoven or whatever, there's a different kind of thing altogether. But for most people, being creative is a process. And boringly going back to the creative brief, if you know your audience and you know your brand values, what you stand for, you can develop narratives that are engaging, that are not about your products and services, but they dovetail with what you stand for as a business. And that's all you need to do. That is a process that you go through. It's like putting somebody in the kitchen with all the ingredients in various cupboards saying, make a cake. If they've got no idea what flour and eggs are, or what milk is, or what sugar is, it's going to take them a really long time to sort of randomly put those things together to make a really nice cake. Even if they do know what the ingredients are and you don't give them the right quantities, they're going to struggle. But if you give them a recipe, then actually they can just follow that recipe and they can create a really nice cake. And that is exactly the same with content. If you've got your recipe, you've got your process, you've got your plan, you can create some really nice, engaging content. Now, there's a lot of people don't want you to know that, but it's true. So it's not a God-given gift. It is a process. Interesting. So slightly controversial there, Dave. Well, depends who you're talking to. Talking to myself, it's a little bit weird. Right. Okay. So what kind of feedback do you get? Well, to be honest, some of it's good, some of it's bad. So the good stuff is it's really where people get this idea of the narrative, so they understand that their product and their services are not the things they want to talk about, the bigger issues in society is where they're at, basically. So people who get that, very positive feedback. And also, I should say, the people who understand the idea of promotion. They understand that this is this isn't a one-off thing. You have to keep on pushing this content. You have to keep on creating fresh content. You don't have to do it every week. You don't have to do it every month. But it's really good to top that content up. I'd say maybe 4 episodes a year minimum. The less positive feedback, negative feedback, that's really from people who don't get it. They kind of get it, but they don't really. The main thing they don't understand is the campaign. So they understand the creative bit. They understand that, talking about the bigger narrative, blah blah blah. That's all very good. They get that. What they don't have the staying power for is the campaign. They kind of think that publishing something once, that's it, one hit wonders. Again, if you look at the big players, I don't know, look at the really big players, the Nikes, the Coca-Colas, the Cadburys, whatever. They push and promote their brands all the time. I mean, everybody knows about Nike shoes. Virtually everybody on the planet knows about Nike shoes, but they still push their brand. And the reason they do that is so that we are continually reminded, it's front of mind, so that when we do walk into that shop to do a transaction, we know about their brand and what they stand for and so on and so forth. So you don't have to have the huge budget of a massive brand, but in order to succeed, you need to understand the importance of good planning and a sustained campaign, sustained conversations, sustained interaction with your audience. That's what it's all about. Right, interesting. So lots to think about there, Dave. And with all this kind of work, who have you got to help you? You got a whole team of people, no doubt. Well, actually, no. So I made a decision a few years ago that I wanted to keep everything really simple. It's not because I've got a massive creative ego and that I can't stand any ideas from other people. That's just not the case. What I did find when I worked with bigger organisations, so let's talk about the FT, the Weather Channel, the 2-4s of this world, and the brands, the businesses that we used to work for as our customers in those days, was that everything was made really complicated. Everything took a long time, really complicated. Nothing was quite good enough. Huge amount of egos. Burnt up lots of hours, charged lots of money, and ultimately was very frustrating because the great ideas that people had right at the beginning were quite often sort of dissembled and squashed and became sort of general sort of garbage by the end of the whole process. So when I left all that, I thought, okay, this is the opportunity to work with local businesses who are very successful in what they're doing, but they don't have the time and they don't know how, but I can actually help them to put together a production schedule and a content and channel plan. So I do it all, which is tricky, but that's it. So how can people find out more if they're interested? If you put at IAmTheHow, IAmTheHow, that's all one word. If you put that into your search engine, you'll come up with a lot of content. There's a website, there's the Apple channel, Spotify channel. There's loads of different channels, and you can find me all over there. But just basically website, telephone, email, hello at IAmTheHow would probably do it, and that's it. Great, thanks, Dave. And before we go, we're near the end of the year. So, any ambitions for 2020? Good question. Well, ambitions, interesting. I mean, I think, I sort of harbour a few secret ambitions. So I've put a couple of my podcasts up for the 2020 Podcast Awards, which are being held in London. One of those is Slow Radio. Slow Radio is it certainly isn't the channel of choice for many, so that might sound a bit odd. As does strange noises that I'm hearing in the background in the studio. But yeah, it's not the content choice for many. It's basically slow radio, soundscapes, the use of sound as an art form, slightly left of field, supposed to be fun, interesting, maybe thought-provoking. The idea that actually does weirdly get quite a lot of audience. That actually is my content marketing tool. So it raises my brand, my offer, the How production offer. So I've put that up, as I say, for the podcast awards, along with a couple of others that I can't mention right now. Not because I don't know them, but because I haven't got permission to do that. Yeah, building audience. I want to build audiences. And I want to work with bigger brands. I want to work with more exciting brands. I want to work with people who get it. So all the people I've worked for, I'm very happy, and I think we've been really successful in 2019. It's been a very productive year. Some great podcasts with Night Scientific, Puffing Billy, Soul Midwife, Argan Solutions. Who else we got? Baby Roo in Ivy Bridge. Pro Ice, all kinds of brands. You can see them all there. So basically, to do more, to work with brands that sort of get it. Basically, I've got a few in production at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to getting those published in due course. Dave, you sound like you're a very busy man, so no doubt you've got no time to do anything else. Well, that's partly true. I haven't got a beard. Always I have, actually. Just realised, but it's only a small one. I haven't got a hipster beard. I do wear a check shirt, and I'm probably described as being a bit of a slaphead. So not your archetypal hipster. I do make a bit of sourdough. So I've got my Levine that I look after, and I make bread, swim, separate things, that is. I swim in the sea and in the pool at Totnes, and I produce programs. So that's it. Dave, I think we're out of time. Let me just check. Oh my goodness, we've been on for nearly 40 minutes, so you've been quite greedy. All that's left for me to say is thanks very much for coming into the studio today. It's been a pleasure. Do come back again, won't you? Yes, I will. I mean, I've got no choice, seeing as I actually present this program. And if you've got anybody else, if you know anybody else who'd be interested in coming along, please pass them up my way. Yep, I kind of will do that because it's weirdly unavoidable, seeing as we actually share the same brain. Okay, Dave, well, like I say, thanks very much for coming along. No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a buzz, and I really don't know why I was so nervous. You have actually managed to put me at ease. Well, I can only try my best. So thanks, Dave, from How Production. Don't forget, if you want to find out more, Google IAmTheHow, and why not just tune into that slow radio. Not the BBC Three slow radio. I mean, they're everywhere. But slow radio by IAmTheHow. I think I'm here next week, not sure. But if I'm not, it's nearly Christmas. So I'll see you in 2020. Bye for now.
Podcasting for brands. IAmTheHow.com.